They say family is supposed to be your safe place. But when I found myself standing on the curb watching my life tossed into garbage bags, I realized that sometimes the people you raise are the ones who break you the most. I never thought that at 71 I'd be sleeping in my truck, wondering where I went wrong as a father and as a man. But what they didn't know was that 1 week can change everything, and it did. I was born and raised in the Midwest, in a time when a man's word and hard work meant something. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I wasn't a perfect man, but I lived with purpose. I served my country, paid my dues, raised my only son on my own after his mother passed, and built a life out of sweat and long nights. I thought I did everything right, but years have a way of twisting people. They change what's valuable, what's respected, and before you know it, you're a burden in the very home you helped build. My son had a beautiful house in the suburbs, a wife who smiled only when others were watching, and 2 teenage kids who barely looked up from their screens long enough to acknowledge my existence. When I moved in with them after my hip surgery, I thought it would be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. I paid for my own groceries, fixed the broken fence, mowed the lawn when I could, and never asked for anything. But after a while, I noticed how my presence started to bother them. The whispers behind closed doors, the sighs when I joined them at dinner, the way they spoke about me like I wasn't sitting right there. It all added up. It began with small things, my son reminding me how expensive life was, his wife suggesting I should downsize or find a community of people my age. Then came the louder arguments. "Dad, you don't understand how hard it is raising a family today," he'd say, as if that excused the coldness in his tone. I bit my tongue. I always did. But the day I found my old photo albums and medals tossed into a storage box by the trash bin, something in me cracked. Those were my memories, the only things I had left of a life that once meant something. A week later, it happened. I came home from the grocery store to find my belongings, my clothes, my toolbox, even my worn recliner piled up on the front lawn. Trash bags lined the driveway like black tombstones of everything I once owned. My son stood on the porch, his arms crossed, his wife behind him holding a cup of coffee like it was any other morning. He didn't even look angry, just cold. "Dad," he said flatly, "we can't keep doing this. You need to figure something out. We've decided it's time." I remember the way my heart slowed down, like it couldn't process what I was hearing. My knees gave a little, but I stayed standing. "Are you kicking me out?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. His wife just shrugged. "It's not good for the kids seeing you like this. It's depressing." That word, depressing, hung in the air like smoke. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I just nodded. I didn't want the neighbors to see me begging my own son for kindness. So I loaded what I could into my old Ford and drove off without a plan. The rest, the pictures, the medals, the keepsakes, were left behind in those bags. By nightfall, I was parked near the edge of town, the kind of place where no one looks twice at an old man sleeping in his truck. I watched the city lights flicker in the distance and thought about how strange it was that a life full of sacrifice could end like this, in silence. That first night was the hardest. I had a few dollars in my wallet, a thermos of coffee, and a heart that felt like it had been ripped open. I kept telling myself not to cry, not to let the weight of it drown me. I thought of my late wife and wondered what she'd say if she saw what had become of our family. I tried to find peace in the small sounds of the night: crickets, wind through the trees, the faint hum of passing cars. Anything to remind me I was still here. But pain has a strange way of sharpening you. In that quiet darkness, I realized something I hadn't in years. I was free. I didn't owe anyone explanations or apologies. For the first time, I was living under someone else's roof or judgment. I was my own man again, even if I was sleeping in the front seat of an old truck. I promised myself that come morning, I'd find a way to start over, even if it was just one step at a time. When the sun came up, I found a small diner off the highway and walked in with the last bit of pride I had left. The waitress gave me a tired smile and poured me coffee before I even sat down. She didn't know who I was or what I'd lost, but somehow that small kindness hit harder than any words my family had said in months. It reminded me that the world outside that house still had good in it. That morning, I wrote down a plan on a napkin. Nothing fancy, just a list of things I could do to get back on my feet. I didn't know it then, but that little act of hope would change everything within a week. Because sometimes life throws you out not to break you, but to remind you that you can still stand, even after everything's been taken away. And that week, it would become the most unexpected turn of my entire life.
I spent the next few mornings living out of that truck, parked behind the diner where the waitress let me sit for hours without asking questions. Her name tag said Linda, but I never told her mine. Maybe she could see I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. Every day, she brought me refills and leftovers she claimed the kitchen couldn't sell. She probably knew I hadn't ordered a full meal since the first day. It was humbling, sitting in that cracked final booth, realizing how invisible you can become in a world that used to revolve around you. When I had my family, my home, and my work, I thought I was respected. But out there, sleeping in a truck and washing up in gas station bathrooms, I was just another old man people looked through. Still, I kept that napkin in my pocket, the one where I'd written my plan. Find temporary work, save enough for a room, rebuild piece by piece. It didn't matter how slow it would take, I just needed to prove to myself that I wasn't done yet. On the third day, I saw a small hardware store a few blocks away from the diner. The faded sign read Johnson's Tools and Repairs. I used to fix engines and wiring during my younger days, and though my hands shook now and then, my mind still remembered how everything worked. I walked in and asked the man at the counter if they needed help. He looked at me, probably saw the wrinkles, the tired eyes, and the worn jacket, and hesitated. But when I mentioned I could fix the broken power saws piled near the back, he raised an eyebrow and told me to prove it. 2 hours later, that saw was humming again. The man, Mr. Johnson, chuckled and said, "Guess you still got some juice left in you, old-timer." He handed me $40 and told me to come by if I wanted more small repair jobs. It wasn't much, but when I walked back to the diner with that money folded in my pocket, I felt something shift. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like trash someone had thrown out. I felt useful again. Each day after that, I started building a new routine. Mornings at the diner, afternoons fixing tools and appliances in the shop's back room, and nights parked by the quiet edge of town where no one bothered me. The truck was uncomfortable, but I'd learned to make it home. I'd open the windows a bit, fold a jacket under my head, and watch the stars. Funny how, after everything, peace found me in the smallest, loneliest places. On the 5th day, Linda sat across from me during a break. She said, "You've got that look." I asked her what she meant, and she smiled. That look people get when they're climbing out of something heavy. I laughed a little, told her maybe she was right. Then she handed me a small paper bag, a sandwich, and 2 apples. She said, "You remind me of my dad. He was stubborn, too." That kindness, simple, quiet, without expectation, did something to me. It reminded me of what family was supposed to feel like. Not the fancy house, not the perfect image my son and his wife liked to maintain, but that human warmth that said, "You still matter." By the end of the week, I'd saved up just enough for a night at a cheap motel. It wasn't much, peeling wallpaper, a flickering lamp, and a creaky bed. But after a week in that truck, it felt like luxury. I took a hot shower for the first time since being kicked out, and as the steam fogged up the mirror, I looked at my reflection. I barely recognized the man staring back. My face looked older, harder, but there was something else there, something alive. I realized that being thrown out didn't destroy me. It stripped away everything unnecessary until I saw who I really was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the life I'd left behind, the son who wouldn't return my calls, the grandkids who'd probably already forgotten me, and the wife I wish I could talk to one more time. I reached into my wallet and pulled out her old photo. The edges worn, the smile faded. "You'd be proud of me, honey." I didn't give up.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The next morning, something unexpected happened. Mr. Johnson called me earlier than usual and asked if I could meet him at the shop. When I arrived, he was standing outside holding a set of keys. He said, "You know, my brother used to live above this place before he passed. Small apartment, nothing fancy. It's been empty for years. I figure it's better being used than collecting dust. You interested?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, and I just nodded. He handed me the keys and said, "You've earned it. Just fix the sink when you move in." I climbed those narrow stairs with my heart pounding like I was 20 again. The apartment was small, one room, a kitchen corner, and a dusty window that faced the sunrise. But to me, it was everything. I opened the window, let the morning light pour in, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. A week earlier, I'd been tossed aside like garbage, humiliated by the people I loved most, but now I had purpose, work, and a roof over my head. Not because someone gave it to me out of pity, but because I earned it. I realized that sometimes being thrown away isn't the end. Sometimes it's the world's rough way of pushing you toward a new beginning. As I stood there looking out at the rising sun, I whispered to myself, "They thought they broke me, but all they did was set me free." I woke up that first morning in the small apartment above the hardware shop, with sunlight slipping through the blinds and the smell of sawdust drifting up from below. It was strange how quickly a place could start to feel like home. I made coffee on an old burner, sat by the window and listened to the sounds of the waking town. Delivery trucks, the clink of tools, the low hum of ordinary life. It wasn't quiet like the suburbs, but it was real, and I liked that. It reminded me that I was still part of the world, not some forgotten shadow. Every day after that felt like building something from the ground up, not just in the shop, but inside myself. I repaired drills, rewired lamps, fixed bicycles, and even helped a young man rebuild his father's lawnmower. Work came slowly, but word spread. People liked that I didn't just fix things. I treated every broken object like it still had worth. Maybe they saw themselves in that. I know I did. Sometimes after closing, I'd sit out on the stoop with Mr. Johnson and watch the traffic go by. He'd talk about his late brother, and I'd talk about the old days, the kind of talk that only makes sense between two men who've seen enough life to stop pretending. "You got fire left in you," he said one night, tapping his cigarette against the railing. "Most folks your age just fade out. But you're still climbing." I didn't say anything then, but that line stayed with me. A few days later, I stopped by the diner to thank Linda for all she'd done. She grinned when she saw me looking cleaner, steadier, different. "You look like a man who's winning again," she said, sliding me a cup of coffee. I laughed, told her it didn't feel like winning, just surviving. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was healing. The real test came unexpectedly. On a rainy Wednesday afternoon, while I was tightening a vise in the back room, the shop phone rang. Mr. Johnson called out, "Hey, it's for you. Says it's your son." For a second, I froze. My son hadn't called since the day he threw me out. My stomach tightened as I took the receiver. "Dad?" came the voice on the other end, hesitant, almost rehearsed. "I heard you're working at some store. Are you okay?" For a moment, I couldn't find words. The last time I heard his voice, it was cold, dismissive. Now it sounded unsure, almost regretful. I swallowed and said, "I'm doing fine. Better than I was." There was silence for a while, just the faint crackle of the line. Then he said, "Look, I didn't mean for things to go that far. We were under a lot of stress. The kids." I cut him off gently. "You don't need to explain, son. Life gets messy. But you don't throw away family." My voice cracked on that last part, but I didn't let it show." He sighed. "Mom would have handled things better," he said quietly. "Yeah, she always did." He asked if he could come by sometime, maybe bring the kids. I didn't say yes or no right away. "Let's just talk again in a few days, one step at a time." After I hung up, I just stood there for a long time, staring at the floor. I should have felt angry or bitter, but I didn't. I just felt tired and oddly at peace. Maybe people need to lose something before they learn its value. Maybe he had to see me disappear before he realized what that meant. That night I thought about what forgiveness really means. It's not about forgetting. It's about letting go of the part of you that keeps waiting for an apology that may never come. I decided that when he was ready, I'd listen, not for him, but for me, because holding on to pain only keeps you trapped in the moment you got hurt. The next morning, the rain had stopped and sunlight broke through the clouds. The shop was busier than usual. A local news reporter came in to do a short segment on small-town tradesmen keeping old skills alive. Mr. Johnson insisted I join in. I tried to decline, but he waved me over. The reporter asked questions about the repairs I'd done, the people I'd helped. When she asked how I got started, I paused, smiled faintly, and said, "Sometimes life breaks you down just so you can learn how to fix yourself again." That one line ended up in the article, printed under a photo of me holding a repaired drill, grease on my hands, a small grin on my face. I didn't think much of it until a few days later, when the shop phone rang again. This time it wasn't my son, it was a woman from the local community center. She'd read the article and wanted to know if I'd teach a weekend class for teenagers on basic repair skills. I almost laughed out loud. Me? A teacher? But she sounded so earnest that I agreed. When the weekend came, I stood in front of a group of kids who looked as lost as I once felt. I showed them how to tighten bolts, how to fix cords, how to make something broken work again. But somewhere in between, I started talking about more than tools. I told them about resilience, about not giving up when life throws you out, about finding value where others see none. They listened, really listened. As I watched them work, I realized something that hit me deeper than anything had in a long time. I wasn't just repairing things anymore. I was rebuilding purpose. Not for money, not for pride, but because it mattered. Because somewhere, some kid might go home that night believing he could still fix what's broken. In his house, in his family, maybe even in himself. And that right there was the start of something bigger than me. The same week I'd been tossed aside, I had found not just a job or shelter, but a reason to wake up every morning. I'd found redemption in a place I never expected. The following weeks turned into months, and for the first time in years I felt steady. The repair classes at the community center became something people actually looked forward to. It started with half a dozen teens who barely knew how to hold a wrench, and before long I had parents dropping by to watch, asking if they could learn too. I taught them what I knew, how to take things apart and put them back together, how to find patience in the process. It wasn't just about fixing things. It was about building something with your own two hands and believing in it again. I guess that's what I've been doing all along without realizing it. On Saturdays, I'd open the shop early, turn on the radio, and get lost in my work. The rhythm of repairing, the click of metal, the hum of machines coming back to life became my therapy. People came in with broken heaters, bicycles, toasters, old clocks, and I'd tell them everything deserves one more try. Some laughed, some nodded, but every time they left with something working again, I saw the same spark in their eyes that I felt in mine. Mr. Johnson would often stand at the counter, pretending to read the newspaper, but I could tell he was proud. "You've turned this old place into something special," he'd say, and I'd just shrug. But deep down, it meant more than he knew. When you've been thrown out and told you're useless, even the smallest bit of recognition can stitch something back together inside you. Then one afternoon, as I was closing up the shop, a familiar car pulled up outside.
My chest tightened when I saw it. My son's SUV. The door opened and out stepped my son, his wife, and my 2 grandkids. They looked unsure, almost nervous. I hadn't seen them since the day they'd thrown me out. My first instinct was to turn away, to protect whatever peace I'd managed to rebuild, but something told me to stay still. "Hi, Dad," my son said softly. His voice didn't carry the same sharpness it once did. It sounded human. The kids looked down at the ground, fidgeting, and his wife clutched a box in her hands. "We wanted to see you, and to bring this." He handed me the box, and when I opened it, my throat tightened. Inside were my old medals, photo albums, and the pocket watch that had belonged to my father. They'd found them in storage, the same things I thought had been lost forever. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything, for the way we treated you. We were wrong." For a moment no one spoke. The air felt heavy, like the world had paused. I could see in his eyes that he meant it, that the pride that once blinded him had finally cracked. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to let the anger spill out, to remind him of those cold words and that long night, but another part of me, the part that had spent nights alone finding strength again, knew that forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about me, choosing peace over pain. I closed the box and set it gently on the counter. I said finally, "It hurt. What you did, it broke something in me. But I also learned something because of it. I learned that a man's worth doesn't come from where he lives or what people think of him. It comes from what he does when he's got nothing left but his will." He nodded, eyes glistening, and for the first time in years he hugged me. It wasn't a quick or half-hearted embrace. It was the kind that says, "I understand now." His wife apologized too, and I could tell she meant it. The grandkids lingered near the door, but when I crouched down and smiled, they rushed toward me and hugged my waist. That broke me. I hadn't realized how much I missed hearing the sound of their laughter until that moment. We sat in the shop for a while, talking like a family again. Awkward at first, then easier. They told me about school, about how the house felt different without me there, and how they wanted to visit my new place. I agreed. Though I told them I didn't have much to show, just a small apartment above the shop, my son smiled. "That's more than enough, Dad. You've built something real." After they left, I stood in the middle of the shop, holding that box to my chest. I thought about the night I drove away with my life in garbage bags, the tears I swallowed, and the silence I endured. I thought about how close I'd come to giving up. But standing there now, surrounded by tools, laughter, and second chances, I realized something powerful. I hadn't been thrown away. I'd been replanted. And in that soil of loss and loneliness, something stronger had grown. That night, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, I sat by my window again, looking out at the lights of the town. I pulled out the photo of my late wife and placed it beside the medals. "You'd laugh if you saw this, sweetheart. I finally learned how to start over." It's strange how life works. Sometimes it takes being broken to understand how strong you really are. I used to think I'd lost everything that mattered, but the truth is, I'd just been stripped down to what was real. Kindness, purpose, forgiveness, and the quiet pride of standing on your own 2 feet again. By the time the stars appeared, I wasn't thinking about the house I'd lost or the things that had been thrown away. I was thinking about the people I'd met, the lessons I'd learned, and the life I'd rebuilt with my own hands. I'd found something my son's big house could never offer: peace. And as I drifted off to sleep, I realized that sometimes the hardest endings are just beginnings in disguise. It's been a year since that night when I stood on the curb watching my life tossed into garbage bags. Sometimes when I pass by houses with trimmed lawns and glowing porch lights, I still remember how it felt. The sting of betrayal, the cold bite of shame, the crushing silence that followed me all the way to that empty road. But the strange thing about pain is that if you let it, it becomes the foundation for something far stronger than you ever imagined. The apartment above the hardware shop is still mine, though I've made it look a little more like a home now. There's a small table by the window, a coffee pot that actually works, and a shelf where I keep those photo albums and medals, the ones my son brought back. Every time I look at them, I see not just memories of who I was, but reminders of what I survived. I no longer see that man as someone broken or thrown away. I see him as someone who refused to give up. The repair classes of the community center have grown beyond what I ever planned. We now have adults joining after work, mothers learning to fix their kids' bikes, and even retirees like me who just want something to belong to. They started calling it the Fix-It Circle, and somehow the name stuck. Every Saturday, that little workshop fills with laughter, chatter, and the whir of power tools. It's not just about repairing things anymore. It's about rebuilding people. I've watched kids who once stared at their phones now proudly hold up the clocks or radios they repaired. I've seen men who thought they were too old to learn smile like they're 20 again when something finally clicks into place. And every time someone says, "You help me believe I can still do something," I smile and tell them, "No, you helped yourself. You just needed a reminder." My son visits more often now. At first it was once a month, then every other weekend. He still carries that look, the kind a man gets when he's trying to make up for lost time. I never make him feel guilty for what happened. Life already taught him that lesson better than I ever could. We talk over coffee, fix small things together in the shop, and sometimes we just sit in silence, which feels better than words. His wife comes along too, quieter than before, but kinder. The kids love climbing up the shop stairs and pretending the place is a castle. They help me clean the counters and ask endless questions about the tools, and I answer every one of them, because that's what grandpas do. We teach, we listen, and we forgive. There was a day a few months ago that stood out more than most. The community center hosted a small event to celebrate the success of the Fix-It Circle. They invited me to speak. Standing at that podium, with people clapping and cameras flashing, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Just a year ago, I was sleeping in my truck, wondering if anyone would notice if I disappeared. And now, here I was. Not famous, not rich, but fulfilled. I cleared my throat and said, "I used to think being thrown away was the end of my story. But I learned that sometimes life clears out what's weighing you down so you can finally build something true. The pieces might not fit the way they used to, but if you're willing to try, you can make something new, something stronger." The crowd applauded, but I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for that old version of me who needed to hear those words a long time ago. After the event, a young man approached me. He looked nervous, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "Sir, I read about what happened to you. I got kicked out too. My family didn't want me around after I lost my job. I just wanted to say, hearing your story, it made me want to try again." He looked down as if embarrassed. I placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Son, the world will always try to measure you by what you've lost. Don't let it. Start with what's left. That's where your strength is hiding." He nodded, eyes wet, and walked away with a small smile. That moment reminded me why I was still here. These days, when I wake up before dawn, I brew my coffee and watch the sunlight hit the streets below. The town feels alive in a way I never noticed before. I see people hurrying to work, kids riding bikes, neighbors waving, small things I used to take for granted. And every time I whisper a quiet thank you, not to anyone specific, just to life itself, for breaking me enough to rebuild me the right way. Sometimes I visit the cemetery where my wife rests. I bring her flowers and sit for a while, telling her about the classes, the shop, the grandkids. I tell her, "You'd like them. They're growing fast." And they finally see their old grandpa as someone worth visiting again. I always end with the same words. "You were right. Family isn't just blood. It's anyone who helps you stand back up when you fall." Before I leave, I always glance at the sky and smile. I used to think forgiveness was for the people who hurt you, but now I know it's really for yourself. It's the peace that lets you move forward without dragging the weight of the past behind you. So if anyone out there is listening, if you've ever been tossed aside, forgotten, or made to feel like you don't matter, remember this: you are not what people discard. You are what you rebuild after they do. Life doesn't end when you're thrown out.
Sometimes that's when it finally begins. And as for me, the man who once had nowhere to go and nothing to hold on to, I learned something simple but powerful. You can lose everything and still come out whole. Because what defines you isn't what you have, but who you decide to become when everything's gone. That's my story. They kicked me out, they threw my life away, but they couldn't bury my spirit. 1 week turned into a lifetime lesson that sometimes the trash heap is where you find gold, and broken things can shine brighter than ever before.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.